You're listening to Gay News.
The latest news from the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer community. And now your host, Brandon CARMODY.
You're listening to Gay News. Today is July 21st, 2015. I'm Brandon CARMODY. We want to welcome our listeners in the United States and around the world. Yesterday, we told you about a Texas man that's charged with first-degree murder after beating his boyfriend to death. 20-year-old Brian Canchola and his boyfriend, 18-year-old Steven Sylvester, got into a fight at their apartment in Austin, Texas, after returning home from a night of drinking on Friday. The roommate told police that he awoke to hear the couple arguing in their bedroom shortly after 4 a.m. He described banging and violent crashing and the sound of a dog yelping in pain. The roommate pushed his way into the couple's room, where he witnessed Canchola, who he described as looking extremely intoxicated, punching Sylvester in the face and throwing a heavy glass and beer bottles at him. Blood was spattered all over the walls. The roommate then drove Sylvester to the ER, but somehow returned home before he was seen by a doctor. Then an hour goes by. At 5:15 a.m., Canchola calls police to report that his boyfriend was unconscious. When police arrived, Canchola had blood on his lips, hands, and feet. Officers also noted that there was a considerable lack of blood on Sylvester, which suggested to him that the body may have been cleaned up prior to his arrival. An autopsy has found that Sylvester suffered signs of strangulation, a neck fracture, and bleeding of the brain. The dog, too, showed indicative signs of strangulation. Canchola is currently in jail on a $500,000 bond. The reason that this story needs to be told again, and that I am going to be going into further depth with you about my life, is that I, your humble host and narrator, Brandon CARMODY, am the survivor of domestic violence. I was violently assaulted by a partner. Multiple attempts were made to create a substantial head injury. Accusations of infidelity were made. The circumstances of what happened in Austin are surprisingly and eerily similar, and I was lucky and thankful to get out with my life, to be able to share my story with you. Tomorrow night, we're going to be going further into my tale, but right now we're going to bring in Gay News correspondent Special Agent Jay.
Thank you for having me back.
I wish it were under better circumstances. So just to set the stage, the event that has occurred, a 20-year-old Texas man has been charged with first-degree murder after he beat his teenage boyfriend to death. Brian Canchola has been charged with first-degree murder of his 18-year-old boyfriend, Steven Sylvester. So if we just look at the overview of the situation, they went to a bar. There was large consumption of alcohol. There were accusations of infidelity, and then severe partner-on-partner violence. And even in this case, there was an animal involved. So I know you've read the facts of this case. Does this hit home for you?
Yes, it does. Very much so.
So if it's all right, I'll open up with our listeners. We're going to talk more about my case tomorrow, but just to let the listeners know, I am the victim of a domestic violent assault. The protocol that we've agreed to for today's show is that we will not talk about dates or years. We will not name partners or accusers for everyone's security and protection. But the general overview in my case, I was violently attacked by a partner in my home. There were repeated attempts to create a substantial head injury with me based on the level of violence that was escalated against me. I believe that had I not defended myself and stopped that final blow against my head, I believe I would have sustained a substantial head injury that would have created a permanent brain injury, or it could have been substantial enough to create my death. My friend Jay, I don't feel that you were as lucky as something similar happened to you, did it not?
Something very similar did occur to me, and drawing the parallels between this particular story and what occurred in my life, it's somewhat eerily similar because, yes, there was intoxication involved. However, I'm not boasting, but I'm saying that I can hold my liquor a bit better than this other person could. And this individual accused me of infidelity, and which wasn't true. I mean, there was no, pardon me, there was no evidence to substantiate any of his claims. Yet he walked away from a $16 an hour job just so he could keep tabs on me, and that thrust us into a considerable amount of debt. And things became heated one afternoon, and next thing I know, I'm having an empty beer bottle smashed over the back of my head, and I felt something wet. It didn't feel hot because it was the same temperature as my body, but it just felt wet. And then once I saw it pooling on the floor in front of my face, I realized what it was. And you know, head wounds bleed. They do. And I knew what had happened. And so I called out. Thank goodness I had a roommate at the time. I called out to him and I said, call the cops. And they showed up and things were dealt with. But when I got to the emergency room, I was told by the attending physician that people had been killed by less effort. And it was an absolute miracle that I'm still here to talk to you. And
now, I know that you have some medical knowledge and experience. You have experience with phlebotomy, so medical terms are no stranger to you. What can you tell us about the medical description of your head injuries?
I had a deep laceration of the occipital scalp, which means the back of my head, just behind my left ear, about 3 inches. The cut was about a 1/4 inch deep. They cut all the way through the fat. They could see the bone. And they had to glue it together. They couldn't stitch it.
I recall. And how long after the attack? I remember seeing pictures and hearing a little bit about the experience. How long after the attack was your head essentially glued together?
It's actually still, just yesterday, the last bit of glue actually fell out. So it's taken about 9 months for it to fully heal.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, and I'm very sorry to hear that. I'm glad that you're doing well now. Taking us back, it sounds like the violent event itself obviously occurred on one day, but it sounds like what happened to you laid itself out over a certain period of time. I want to read you something really quick here. This is from the HOTLINE.org, and it describes LGBTQ relationship violence. Perhaps we can relate this to what happened to both of us. It says, abusive partners in LGBTQ relationships use all of the same tactics to gain power and control as abusive partners in heterosexual relationships: physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, financial control, isolation, and more. So let's spring from there. What is your immediate reaction when you hear that is the typical protocol of an LGBTQ abuser? Relate that to what happened to you, if you would, sir.
Well, I don't want to say it's protocol. That normalizes it. But what I want to say is that what occurred to me the next day, I would say maybe 12 to 18 hours after the incident, he chalked it up to, oh, I was sexually frustrated. And, well, I'm sorry, I really don't want to have sex with someone that is trying to kill me. That's just, one of my basic tenets.
Yes.
Yeah. But also money, because, like I said, he walked away from a very lucrative job, and I'm on disability, so I have a very fixed income. I only get so much every month, and it was a very tense situation to get go. And then for him to just stroll away from this job that was paying the bills, and then all of a sudden I'm responsible for all of it. So you can understand how I would come to resent a bit of that, specifically because he assumed wrongly that I was cheating on him. There was no evidence. I had not cheated on him. What I would do is I would pop on Craigslist, because let me tell you and all your listeners right now, if you go to the Men Seeking Men on Craigslist, some of the profiles that they have put up, they are so ridiculously funny. You can't make that stuff up. You really can't. And it's hilarious to read these things. And so he assumed because I was looking at Craigslist that I was looking on Craigslist.
Okay, I see. Now, if you were to compare, I mean, clearly what's happened in Texas is obscene, and, you know, the man is held on a first-degree murder charge. What do you think when you, it's horrifying. When you look at a case like this, theorize, if you will, Jay, do you believe that there would have been warning signs in this relationship? This would not have been their first rodeo, would it?
No, I don't think so. I think they probably would have gone through the rigmarole a few times before. What concerns me most is that they were what appears to be in on-campus housing. I understand it was like fringe campus, but it seems to be campus-sanctioned housing. There should have been someone, and apparently this person had a roommate, and that roommate either wasn't there or wasn't there to intervene, and things transpired.
More disturbing. No, sorry to interject, but more disturbing than that was, I'll read you one highlight from the article. The roommate was home, was awakened at 4:13 in the morning. The roommate said Canchola appeared to be extremely intoxicated, punched Sylvester in the face, threw a heavy glass and beer bottles, which I know, I'm sorry, that's going to relate to what happened to you. He threatened to kill Sylvester's dog after accusing him of cheating. And then here's the part that's not connecting with me. This is the part that makes no sense, and I really want to understand this better. The roommate apparently took Sylvester to the emergency room to seek medical treatment.
And he walked out without treatment.
He walked out without treatment, and an hour later he was dead. So we're talking between 4:13 a.m. and 5:15 a.m. Mr. Sylvester, Stephen Sylvester, died. So I'm not understanding how anyone in the medical profession, even if they were in the waiting room, let this man with a substantial head injury, bleeding, out. We're going to need to look more into that. But so the roommate, unfortunately, is going to be the eyewitness that is going to put Canchola in prison. I mean, there is not going to be any way out of this for this young 20-year-old man. I mean, this is going to be a first-degree murder conviction, I can tell you right now.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And looking at the scene, an officer at the scene noted that Canchola had blood on his lips, hands, and feet. He also noted that there was a considerable lack of blood on the partner, which suggested to him that the body may have been cleaned up prior to his arrival. So you have not only the violent acts against his partner and the dog, but tampering with the crime scene, trying to alter the crime scene. I would like to understand what is going through this young man's mind and what his background and his mindset is, because these are disparaging acts of violence that are just, my mind is spinning right now.
I'm thinking that at this point, what wasn't going through his mind is more important than what was, because there seems to be very little. It was a panic. He didn't mean to do it, but oops, he did. And now he's cost a life. A very beautiful young life. And he's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life. For the rest of his life.
Yes. I want to make sure that we offer it to our viewers, Jay, the National Domestic Hotline, that any of you can call for help if you feel that you're in a dangerous relationship or abusive situation. Please, I urge you with all sincerity, call 1-800-799-7233. And if you're in a situation where it's unsafe or too dangerous to make that call, please, for the love of God, reach out to family or friends or someone within your inner circle and work from without. You know, this is something that touches me deeply. I truly believe, although the Portland police do not agree with me, we'll be going over my case on tomorrow night's show. I'm going to open up to the listeners, and we're going to take everyone through my case point per point, blow for blow. But I will tell you right now that there was a prosecution in my case. The attacker faced a charge of assault in the 4th degree, which, if you know anything about the varying different degrees, assault in the 4th degree is basically like twisting someone's arm and slapping them around a little bit, whereas I felt that the level of violence against me was intended for a homicide. So the police, the justice system, and I were not we were not in alignment as far as the charges he faced in my case. And he ultimately did serve 6 months in prison.
What I'm saying is that at that point, I could have taken him away from his children. I could have taken him away from his family. It went from an assault 4 to an assault 2 because he decided to use a weapon. Now, if it had just been his hands, that's a completely different thing. But when he decided to take up a weapon, case being a beer bottle, and smash it up the backside of my head, that changes the whole game. But I talked it down because I know how important his family is to him. He's still free to walk. Whether that was the wisest decision, I do not know. But I'm still here to talk about it. And as you said, if you would repeat that number again for the domestic abuse hotline.
Absolutely. Listeners, if you are in any type of domestic abuse, violence, or in fear of your safety, please, we are urging you to call 1-800-799-7233. So, Jay, one question for you. Speaking to victims, we have this forum. You and I are both victims of horrendous acts of domestic violence. So we are firsthand witnesses and survivors. Let me ask you this as a victim. Since you were speaking about the choices that you got to make in the prosecution, do you feel that that's victims' rights to have a hand in making decisions as far as what happens in a legal case? Do you think the victim should be able to decide what happens to the attacker?
Well, I suppose that really depends on what state they're left in. But in my case, being as unconscious and aware of what's going on, yes, I do believe that the decisions I made were calculated decisions. And they were made in the best of hope that he would possibly change. Whether that happens, I don't know. I mean, that's really not up to me. That's up to him. I can't force anybody to make any decision, and I can't force anybody to understand a choice that they haven't made yet. But, gosh, that's a really complicated question, Brendan. That really is.
Well, do you feel that you got justice? Do you feel that you reached a fair agreement in terms of the legal side of the prosecution? Okay.
Absolutely, because if that guy decides to mess with me again, I can throw him in jail with a whisper. And he knows that. So, that being said, let's not try that again.
Yeah. Now, I'll be going over, as I mentioned, I'm going to bring in a specialist tomorrow night, and we're going to go over my case point per point. But I will give you a little preview as far as the legal end. I amazingly caught up with my accuser online a few years ago, he is still alive. He's still in Portland. He's still out there. And I asked him to tell me what happened. And the reason that I needed to ask him directly is that in my case, the prosecutors, the district attorneys, stopped returning my phone calls, stopped inviting me to court hearings. All of a sudden, it was like the case was dropped. And I spent many years, earnestly feeling like I got no justice and like nothing happened to the man. I can now tell you, and I can tell the listeners, that that's not true at all. There was a trial. There were some special circumstances, which I'm going to get into that tomorrow. But he ultimately deferred sentencing for 2 years after the attack. And then he did actually serve 6 months prison time for attacking me, but it was deferred. So he served that 6 months 2 years after the attack due to a special circumstance, which we'll cover tomorrow. So I am satisfied. he did prison time. He did 5 rounds of anger management, 5 rounds, of which he was only required to go through anger management once, and he signed himself up again and again and again. So I will put it to you this way. Well, you will never, under any circumstance, find me sitting down at Starbucks for a frappuccino with this individual. I am satisfied that when I engaged him in civil dialogue and that I asked him to tell me what happened, I am satisfied that this information he gave me is the truth, because it makes perfect sense to me, and it all adds up. It follows.
Now answer me this: did he go through dialectic behavioral therapy, DBT?
I actually don't know, but I know multiple rounds of anger management, parole and probation, and the 6 months prison time, and I believe at this point he's off paper. I know he's off paper.
Well, what I'm saying is that part of anger management typically includes dialectic behavioral therapy, where you examine exactly what's making you angry and why you're angry, and how to fix that and why and how. It's the if, ands, what's, and whys of why are you so angry about this, and let's explore that. Let's figure it out. And then they use this wheel. It's like, I see, I think, I feel, I want, I will. And it's like, I see that there's a problem here. I think that what should happen, I feel that this needs to change. What I want is for this to change, and what I'm willing to do is help you change that. And so long as they get in that cycle of logic, that's basically what it is. It's how to diffuse the situation before it even becomes a situation. And if more people would become more aware of themselves instead of being so reactive, instead of, or responsive instead of reactive.
And I've heard of DBT, and I've studied it now, but in retrospect, going back a few years ago to the brief encounter that I had with my attacker, I was unfamiliar with it at the time. My basic burning curiosity, the things that I felt brave enough to ask him, because here's the funny thing, it was just a little cell phone screen, just a little picture and a little icon on a cell phone, and I was still afraid of him all of these years later, because in my case, and again, I just want to make a disclaimer for the viewers, this is the circumstances. This has nothing to do with race, but in my particular case, my attacker was a young, athletically fit African American. He was 18. He was training as a professional boxer, so he was physically fit. He was strong. He was more than 10 times stronger than me. So he had the build, the strength, and that image was ever ingrained in my mind after repeated attempts, as we said, to ultimately crack my head or my skull open, which is the end result that I'm sure we were going for. So yes, seeing his image on a little computer screen still brings a little bit of fear and panic to my mind. It does.
And that's exactly what I'm going back to, is that, I was just looking. One scan of my email would show that I was not communicating with anybody. I was just reading these people's profiles because I found them hilarious. Some of the descriptions is like of what they want and how they want it done and this, that, and the other thing, etc. They are so funny. And, I get a kick out of it. And when The Price is Right isn't on in between the news and, Maury Povich or whatever, I have a little downtime. And so I was looking up these things. And so he found the history and he's like, why were you looking at Craigslist? I said, because it's funny. But he didn't want to believe that. He didn't want to believe that. He thought I was cheating on him. And so he wanted to believe it to the last fiber of his being that I was cheating on him. And that just wasn't true.
And even if it's true in the Texas case, of course we don't know right now, the world, I have the picture of Brian and Steven on my screen right now. They look like the sweetest, most adorable young couple in love in this photo. It's almost incomprehensible looking at this picture to realize the level of violence and that a life ended just based on this photo. There's got to be so much more to this story and the backstory and potential near misses that may have happened.
There must have been more. This wasn't a one-time incident. There must have been more. Because you don't just break your boyfriend's neck on a whim. I mean, there must have been something building up to it. And, you know, perhaps we will never understand the full details. But from what I do understand from personal experience is that, yes, it is a buildup. So there must have been something that occurred to cause this person anxiety. And I'm not sure that he intended to kill Sylvester, but he did. And that's the end result.
Here's another statistic from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Approximately 23% of LGBTQ men and 50% of LGBTQ women experience abuse from their intimate partners. This means that members of the LGBTQ community are slightly more likely to experience abuse than straight couples. One additional add-on here, same-sex partners who are abusive and controlling use all the same tactics to gain power and control in relationships. So we know that, you know, gay, straight, black or white, LGBTQ or not, the tactics are the same. It really has to do with, like you're saying, with that mindset.
Yeah.
Survivors experience incredible isolation in the LGBTQ relationships that are abusive. Friends or family may have rejected them, distanced themselves, or made unsupportive, homophobic statements when the survivor came out for talking about their relationships. In my particular case, of course, I broadcasted. I made it sure that everyone knew what happened, but not very many people knew this person, and I didn't know this person for very long before this happened. It was a complete surprise in my case, and I had no prior experience with violence or domestic violence, so it was a complete shocker for me. Now that I look back, I can see where these warning signs were written on the wall. I just simply did not know this person and did not know them for very long. I didn't have time to look for these things.
Yeah. Well, fortunately for us, it's a lesson of live and learn. And live is the operative word in that sentence.
Final bit here, just talking about legal options for people that have been abused. Some legal remedies that are available to survivors may include protective orders. If you are in an unhealthy or dangerous relationship and not sure where you can get support, please don't hesitate to call 1-800-799-7233. You never know. It could save a life. We want to give a special thanks to Special Agent Jay today. We really appreciate you opening up and sharing your extremely personal story of survival and heroism.
Well, thank you for having me, and I hope I can save a life.
Okay, Godspeed. Thanks for coming on Gay News today.
All right. Well, thanks for having me again.